What up, everybody? We're here again talking with a number of folks who are going beyond the boundaries of just putting out records, but they are matching the messages in their songs with their activism. And, you know, earlier this week we talked with Jasiri X out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who kind of personifies what I'm calling the new messengers, meaning that in music there's always been people that have done messages, from the Public Enemies all the way back to the days of the Harry Belafontes. But we wanted to look at the new and up-and-coming generation of artists that have been following those footsteps and maybe even surpassing them in their work. And so we have a number of people in the studio today, including Nomi from the group Power Struggle, and my man Kiwi, who many of us in the Bay Area know for Native Guns, but he's also a solo artist. And I wanted to welcome you all. We also have Queen Dealer and Lady Blue and Dreg, so they're going to be up here later on. But I wanted to start off with you all because I've always been impressed that what you all managed to do is put out music that stands on its own. Like I can listen to a Kiwi record, I can listen to Power Struggle and just bump it. But then it's like you are living the stuff that we might hear in some of the songs. And maybe you could talk about the significance of that and some of the issues that you're really tackling.
All right. Well, thank you, Davey D, for having me on the show today. I think for me, the process happened in a way that, you know, I was just a regular dude just working, trying to make it in the rap scene. But I think I kind of got organized through the music that I was listening to. A lot of the music that was coming out from, like, you know, cats like Native Guns to, you know, all the progressive hip-hop folks really started to influence me and made me want to think about the condition that I was in. So that kind of propelled me to want to get involved in community groups and see what was going on the ground, and then eventually brought me to the point that I'm at now as the organizer in the community.
How do you balance that? And what are some of the community organizations that you're with?
Well, my kind of 9-to-5 day job is at the Filipino Community Center in the Excelsior District. Mm-hmm. And we do services and organizing, multi-sectoral organizing for immigrant families. So I think for me, that process was kind of like really being ingrained in what was happening on the ground in the community, dealing with immigrant issues, dealing with folks that were undocumented, folks that were working below minimum wage jobs, facing wage theft and different things like that. And it really inspired me to kind of tackle these issues and also reflect on my own experience as like a proletariat person, as a working class person. And I just wanted that to come full circle in the music that I was making, because, you know, I couldn't really rap about things that I wasn't experiencing like most real MCs, you know?
Right.
So that's how it came out.
Well, you know, one of the interesting aspects of this is, and Kiwi, you could chime into this as well, because you would probably be like among the first generation of people that I would look at in this vein. When we talk about Filipinos involved in hip-hop, you know, a mark has been made on the turntable side. Mm-hmm. You know, here in the Bay Area, legendary people like Apollo, Qbert, and I mean, it's a long list now, you know, that have changed the game. But MCing on the mic was something that we just didn't really see. Mm-hmm. And now, you know, now it's like you all are a formidable force on the mic. You know, there's Kiwi, there's Bamboo, there's Rocky Rivera. I mean, there's like a whole list. Like, we don't want to see y'all coming. You talk a little bit about that in terms of, you know, how important has that been just in the community that, you know, that does idolize some of the people that I mentioned, you know, and you now being among that pantheon of artists?
Well, you know, and I'll let Kiwi touch on it too, but I think in our neighborhood, in our community, you know, these are kids that are growing up in the hood, basically. So obviously the hip-hop culture is going to affect them, influence them, and it's going to be a part of their lives. You know, and so it is the culture they're going to gravitate to and want to become rappers and want to utilize this art form to tell their personal stories. And the way it changes is that it talks about that experience, being immigrants, being kind of forced out of their homelands because of economic depression, and then coming to this country. So I think it's almost the same form as what was happening and is still happening in Black and Latino ghettos.
Right. Q, let me ask you to add to that, but also with a little bit of a caveat, you know, how much of what we might say is indigenous to Filipino culture, whether it's here in the States or abroad, does hip-hop culture, and in particular the oral tradition of rapping, play into what you all are doing now?
Well, I think that, well, first, this is just my opinion, and people, this is a whole other discussion, but I feel like hip-hop music and hip-hop culture is black music and black culture. And so I feel like my approach to it is with that in mind, as somebody who has a lot of respect and who and admiration for this beautiful culture that came out of the ghetto, you know. And with that, as a person of color, as somebody who, as Filipinos, as peoples who have shared experiences with the black community in terms of, you know, being victims of capitalism, being victims of like things like colonization, forced migration. I feel like there were very many parallels in terms of the music, in terms of how I experienced the music and the culture. Like I was like, you know, I can't relate to these other forms of culture or mainstream American culture because it doesn't speak to my experience, whereas hip hop did. And so I feel like it was just kind of a matter of time for, you know, for Filipinos to pick up the mic. You know, I think maybe DJing and b-boying and graph writing was maybe a sort of a way to kind of get our feet wet in terms of the culture. But I feel like emceeing really brought a voice to our experience. And I feel for myself, and I think for Nomi as well, and a lot of the other Filipino hip-hop artists out there, I feel like the way that we really honor and respect the history of hip-hop music is by really talking about our own experience from our own perspective and with our own voice.
In many circles, you're an elder statesman now. You know, I mean, when people look back to that album, you know, with Native Guns, you know, that seems to be like a launching off, you know. So how do you feel about that, and what do you know, and not to blow you up like that, but I mean, you know, but obviously it's an influence, and we see it.
Yeah, I mean, there are times where I kind of reflect on it and be like, yeah, that was, you know, when people talk to me about it, and I try to be humble about it as well. But at the same time, when I really reflect on it, I feel like, yeah, that was a pretty important album.
I think what's more important about it is that, you know, for people who don't know your background among being an activist and being an international activist, is that you came out of gang life. And you could have easily went down another path where everybody have followed you that way. What made you not go down that path, even though you opened up the album with a jumping in, you know? But what, you know, why didn't you go down that path fully, where as many people would have said, okay, let me do the whole gangster thing, but now we got a whole legion of conscious MCs coming out of the Panay community.
I didn't choose gangs because of hip hop. You know, hip hop was the escape, and it was. I think just giving credit to myself as a teenager, I was, even though I was in the gang life, I was also kind of questioning it. I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. I got homeboys, you know, going to jail and dying. I don't know if I want to go. I don't know if I necessarily want to go down that path. You know, KRS-One, BDP, Stop the Violence. You know, Public Enemy came along, and like it, you know, it just hit me at the right time where I was like, okay, let me choose this instead, and you know, it became that outlet for me.
You know, let me ask you both. One of the issues that you've been dealing with, Nomi, has been immigration, and you know, I don't think a lot of people, when they think immigration, they just think Mexican, but you know, in the Bay Area where we're at, you know, they forget that a lot of people that come under the ICE raids and all that are Asians, in particular Southeast Asians, and maybe you could speak to that experience, you know, and the significance of raising that awareness and how you're approaching that both in music and in your activism.
Right. So, you know, the immigration issue is like within the Filipino community, what's really unknown is that there's over 1 million undocumented Filipinos in the U.S. out of 4 million Filipinos.
Wow, 1 million?
There's 1 million undocumented that we know of. So it's a large number, right? And through our work at the Filipino Community Center, we're also part of a national alliance called National Alliance for Filipino Concerns, which comprises about organizations in 23 cities across the country. And, you know, what we're really trying to do is educate people on what their rights are as immigrants, whether documented or undocumented. And we realized that a lot of folks end up in this country that are undocumented because of various issues. It's a very complex issue. A lot of people are trafficked to this country or are brought in through different schemes that make them pay these huge costs for them to come into this country by an agency or whatever. When they get here, they don't have a visa, or they're forced to work temporarily.
They're running hustle. They're running
and then they end up undocumented. So, you know, one of the big campaigns that we helped push this last fall was J.B. Labrojo, who was the undocumented, who became undocumented. And through the efforts of NAFCON and his own networks and his community, we were able to get him to stall the deportation for a year. And he was a very typical case that was like, you know, he was kind of like the model immigration case. Like, he didn't have no criminal record. He came here legally, quote unquote, but then became undocumented, or fell out of documentation because they didn't give him a visa. So, you know, that was just an example of how the community can really push if we're organized and if we really unify on addressing these immigration issues.
Are you making the connections with, say, our brothers and sisters in the Latino community who really are front and center in terms of policies, state by state, being made to go after them? Has it overshadowed what is going on in the Filipino community?
I don't think, well, it has overshadowed it, but I think from the brothers and sisters that we work with in the Latino community, they also want to highlight that this is a broader issue than just what affects their community. You know what I mean? Because then people, they get scapegoated and this and that by the reactionary conservative forces. You know what I'm saying? So, so it's really important that like, for example, in San Francisco, there's SF Island, and it's a network of immigration groups, but it encompasses groups from all over the strata, from groups from Latin America, Asia, Africa, because it identifies that this is not just one group's issue. You know, that immigrants come to this country because of the economic depression in their homelands. That can be linked to, you know, imperialism, capitalism, etc., all the isms, war, and, you know, come to this place because this is where, you know, they can try to get some, like, a job or whatever. But that's the main contradiction, you know.
Kiwi, you know, I mentioned earlier international, you know. So you go to the Philippines and you're involved in politics there, you know, and not just involved, but the way that the politics rolls, sometimes it's counter to what the imperialism of the U.S. wants to do. So it makes for a very interesting scenario, you know, being, you know, you have this cultural platform, you're using this. Talk about some of the stuff that you've been doing over there and what challenges it's presented.
Well, a lot of the reasons that we have so many immigrants coming from the Philippines, not just in America, but all over the world, migration, is because of the conditions that in the Philippines that are due to things like U.S. imperialism. And so I think for myself in my own process of becoming politicized and becoming conscious, that became the roots of, like, why I do what I do. You know, it's because there our community's going through stuff here, but I think the root of it is actually in the Philippines. So so I became involved in that struggle, and I think that becoming politicized actually informed my music. You know, because before that I was just sort of rapping, like, you know, I'm this, I'm that, I'm very handsome guy and this and that, you know. But now it's more like I'm a handsome guy, and, you know, you know, you know, let's talk about the international struggle. Let's talk about imperialism. Let's talk about war and how that affects our country.
Well, the U.S. has targeted certain parts of the Philippines and used the word terrorism when targeting them. Does that concern you? Because we've had people that we know that have come under the gun, you know, of the government, that are here because of their activism. And I only bring this up because we've seen that whenever folks, you know, at least in the black community, have internationalized the struggle, from the Paul Robesons to the Malcolm X to the Martin Luther Kings, the hammer of the state has come down hard on them. I'm not sure if it's playing out the same way when you're doing this as, somebody outside the black community, if,
Right.
because you can point to a homeland, so to speak. But do you see that as a challenge, and is that a concern?
Yeah, I mean, let me tell you something. Like, I feel like the repression is so bad that I almost feel like people have no choice but to resist. And that's not just in the Philippines, that's all over the world in terms of just like the repression around, because of occupation, because of war, because of state repression in all these different countries all over the world, that people have no choice but to resist. So in terms of just like people labeling us terrorists or whatever, whatever ways they want to criminalize activists, it's the fact is that it's become so dire that in a way it's good because of the people power that has come out of that,
Right. As we get ready to close this segment, I want to ask you maybe about two things that are landmark. The I Hotel, what has that meant in terms of your activism, and the history of that, because this is ground zero for that. And of course, I have to ask about the superstardom of Manny Pacquiao, which is, what that has meant if you're if the politics gel, or if they are in a different ball game. I'll start with you, Nomi.
Okay. Well, the I Hotel, the I Hotel is very significant to me because of its history and even just the practicality of it being able to change rent rules within the city.
Right.
Being the institute rent control. So I think that's a big thing, and especially in such an expensive city like San Francisco. But for me, I think I give much respect to the folks like Uncle Bill Soro, who, kind of in their heyday were doing so much, and then as they got older, made sure that they built up and supported the young activists coming up.
Right.
Under them.
And they even have exhibits now going on at the I Hotel
exactly,
with a landmark, granddaddy of them all, Dream,
the
the late Dream, R.I.P.,
Yeah, so continuing that work. I think one of the things that was amazing about the I Hotel, too, was that it really galvanized the community around a land issue, around housing issues, you know what I mean?
Right.
So it unified people beyond just like, okay, this is about old Filipino Manongs who worked in the fields that need a place to live, but it really brought out the larger issue about housing rights and land rights in the city. So, that was a great thing.
And that's a forgotten
struggle.
That's
a forgotten struggle, and then the Manny thing, I think, I love Manny Pacquiao, he's my Jeremy Lin. But, like...
Before there was Jeremy, there was Manny.
Yeah. I'll say this, because I just think the one thing that's kind of unfortunate when I watch like the 24-hour HBO boxing special, as he ascends and becomes more popular and famous, it seems like the story seems to get lost about his background, about the fact that he sold cigarettes in the streets. He came from General Santos. He was a peasant, basically.
Right.
And or not a peasant, but an urban, poor dweller. And now the story seems to get diluted as he gets richer and more famous.
Well, more people want to associate themselves, so then it becomes more of a corporate commodity to be bought and sold.
Right.
And they need a narrative to make it fit right.
Exactly. But when I think about the unfortunate aspect of it, is like in boxing in general, boxers always come from the tough backgrounds, you know what I mean? And that can be their unity. And instead, now, he's being highlighted as like a rich millionaire, et cetera, politician. And I think that's kind of unfortunate. So if I had a chance to sit down with Manny, I'd be like, yo, man, come on.
Go back to
Bring
the roots.
back to the roots.
Okay. Kiwi, how you seeing this?
I Hotel, one of the things, too, about the I Hotel is that it was arguably one of the catalysts for the Asian American movement. Just because of how national, how recognized it became, and how it brought like the community together around this issue of housing for these Asian and Chinese and Filipino manongs, elders, and I think also a lot of the people who were involved in that, especially Bill Soro, Al Robles,
late Al Robles,
were folks who welcomed me when I came to when I first moved to the Bay Area, and became my elders, because I had left my hometown and come to America, come to the Bay Area.
Right.
And I was searching for communities, and they kind of became a foundation for me as I moved here. So that was really important. As far as Manny goes, yeah, that's a tough one. I think that, for me, the same thing in terms of just like really, not really. I don't really. I see him as somebody who I root for, and also somebody who is an inspiration because of where he came from.
Right.
And
but politically, you all would have to have some discussion.
Politically, we definitely have to have discussion. I feel like everybody wants a piece of Manny, so like in some ways he's probably being influenced by the wrong people out there in the Philippines in particular. One of the biggest problems in the Philippines is corrupt politicians. That's like one of the basic problems in terms of the the few families, the 1% of the Philippines that have a lot of influence in politics and the economy out there. And so those folks are tapping Manny on the shoulder like, hey, welcome.
With us.
Let's
Right. It kind of reminds me of the way Wycliffe is to Haiti. You know what I mean? There's a very poor population, but there's a very inspiring, and many people don't know about Haiti until you see Wycliffe, but the politics is very, very different, and that's a challenge.
He's more outspoken than Manny.
Yeah.
And so you get to really see his politics. And in full display.
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take a break. Nomi, he has to actually go and work with the youth, so he's going to bounce on out of here. We're going to be coming back. We're going to be joined by Dregs 1, Lady Blue, and Queen Dealer, and Kiwi will also be around, so we'll take a break and be right back.
Thank you very much.
We're back here. Big shout out to the homies, Kiwi, who also had to go because he's working with the youth too, and Nomi from Power Struggle, both making major impact in the community, and we were glad to have them on. Our next round of guests here include Dregs 1, we have Queen Dealer, and we have Lady Blue, and you all are also on the front lines in doing what you do. I've known Dealer for a while because she's been involved heavily with Turf Unity in the streets of East Oakland, making sure when there's violence and stuff going on, she's part of a posse of young people who don't often show up in the TV cameras, who's out there trying to really turn the lives of young people around, just more than young people, the people that's in Oakland around, away from that. And, I'm often annoyed when people say, well, they protest this, they protest that, but what about when we kill each other? Well, she and Lady Blue, they are people that are out there day in and day out doing that work. It's underappreciated and unsung, but they're here with us this afternoon to share with us their art and activism. Dregs, I met him, he just reminded me I met him when I came to speak at a youth event, but then I was reintroduced to him when I was looking at these videos, and I said, who's this guy doing commentary? He's talking about gentrification and talking about food, and so basically taking his art and saying, let me become a TV commentator. We don't need, the folks on CNN to do it. He is the CNN, so I'm glad to have you all in the building. Let me start off with you, Queen. I kind of introduced you as to some of the stuff you're doing. Maybe you can go in a little further, and talk about Turf Unity, Silence the Violence, and how your music and art intersect with your activism.
So I started community activism when I was in high school, and I noticed that the young people voice, as far as on these roundtables. I was a young person sitting on boards to pass initiatives like free bus passes, which we got in 2002-2003 school year. And I just noticed, like, nobody is talking about the stuff or the struggles that we're facing as young people music-wise. So that's what inspired me to do music, Community activism is the reason why I even started to rap. And so I got hooked up with groups like Urban Peace Movement, Silence the Violence, United Roots, first known as Covenant Records. And when I went there, I was just a young person who was very angry with the stuff that was going on in Oakland but didn't really have a space to really let that out. And the Covenant House provided that space for me as a young person,
Right.
to come in there to record for free, and also gave me like countless outlets to just be out there as a young person uplifting my peers.
You weren't enticed by the narrative and the success stories in Oakland of folks who've come out, you know, from the Too Shorts on down that might have went another direction. You know, that didn't move you to, you know, because they made millions, they do well, but you went the opposite direction in terms of the content and the approach.
Well, because I saw the direct effect that it was having on the young people around me, you know. I remember when we quote-unquote started the hyphy movement, and then Fab had the yellow bus, and I actually had an ice cream truck that was out there on the streets going around and everything, and we would go dumb in the streets. My brother even, you know, would ghost ride.
Go dumb means getting amped up, and, you know.
But at the end of the day, you know, if we saw our elders out there, we'll pass out waters. You know what I mean?
Right.
If people sung, like sometimes I would play my songs on the ice cream truck, I would just give out free ice cream to the kids. So I wanted to make sure that it was
You
community.
had an actual ice cream truck.
I had an actual ice cream truck called the Hyphy Icy. You can look it up. It's in numerous videos
Right.
all across, you know what I
I've
mean?
seen that ice cream truck, but
Yeah.
I didn't know that was your ice cream
Yeah,
truck.
it was me and my brothers. My older brother, he started it, and then I was like, well, let me bring my music element to it, my community activism element to it,
Right.
and like, let's really tie our community into this ice cream truck. And we shut down business. I mean, ice cream trucks was mad at us.
Right.
Because kids would tell us, we stayed out here hours waiting for y'all too, where we had to start like giving out our number, and people would just call us like,
Right.
come to 94th, or
This is
come to
before the
Models.
tweet days.
Yeah, this was before the
Oh,
tweets
yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and all that. Like we gave out our number. But anyway, all that to say, we wanted to directly tie, and I've always, as an artist, wanted to directly tie my community activism to the music, because I saw how the young people were struggling. You know, like
Right.
myself, we didn't like. I was the last era of the functions.
Right.
You know, out here, like our generation messed that up because it was always fights and all that stuff. So it's not nothing for the young people to do.
Right.
You know, and then I go to places like Austin, and it's college town, and it's everything for those young people to do out there.
Right. I was going to ask you, and I'm going to let you hold that thought, because Dealer is a dual citizen in this country. She's well known in Oakland, but she's also well known in Texas, where she spends a lot of time as well. So I'm going to come back to you on that. Dregs, as I said, all of a sudden I see these commentaries popping up. And they're just not commentaries, but I mean, you're going hard and going deep, especially when you did the thing, and maybe we'll get a chance to show it, when you did the thing on gentrification. You came to San Francisco and was giving folks the business. Talk a little bit about how you got into this role as an artist, and then, you know, using your art to comment.
I mean, basically, I've been recording and putting out my own music since I was 19. I'm 24 now, and I kind of always had like some type of a conscious message in my music, but I really started like going hard on that when I went to school at UC Riverside, and I was a direct victim of the education cuts and the financial aid cuts and stuff like that. And
For people who don't know, and for people outside of Cali, in UC, they doubled the tuition, and now there's a proposal to increase it 80%, which is why you have Occupy Cal and all the Occupy movements on this campus, is why they was pepper spraying the students, because 80% proposal to increase tuition. So when I graduated, I think I owed like $2,000, and y'all are paying $12,000, and they want to raise that to like $25,000 before everything is said and done per semester. This is the state college system. Thank you, Richard Bloom. That is Diane Feinstein's husband. He sits on the Regents. We had to shout him out for trying to raise the tuition. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so like I was saying, you know, I dropped out because of that, but before I did, I was an ethnic studies major, so I was like learning directly about the issues that affect us and have affected us for years, and I was just like really passionate about it and really inspired by it. And at the same time, I was concerned because the other kids in the college wasn't as concerned. You know what I mean? They would hear this stuff in class and they wouldn't even be paying attention. So I'm like, man, what can I really do about this? I've been working with youth since I was a youth, but music is such a more powerful tool to reach people. I'm like, man, I had to make a commitment to make my music about that too. And then as far as the videos, the way the game is changing right now, video and YouTube is such an important tool. Like we use streaming right now, you know what I mean? So instead of just making a million videos of me in the studio and you know what I'm saying, like me live and you know what I mean, all this stuff, I was like, man, why don't I just use the video as a commentary and like a companion to my music to address some of the issues I'm concerned about.
What's been the response, especially the gentrification one? You stepping on toes there.
Yeah, definitely.
You want to bring some of the points that you were highlighting? I was like, ooh. It was like one of those videos that you watch and go, ooh. He's standing in front of people talking about these pink poodles don't belong here. Who brought these, dandelions into our new?
Oh, my.
Something like that. I mean, I'm born and raised in San Francisco, and I'm just kind of concerned that, like, the black and Latino population is declining, especially the black population. I highlighted the mission especially. It's just so many people with money, with backgrounds of financial success and privilege that come into these areas without paying respect to the people that were there before. And by that I mean, you can come to a neighborhood and integrate. That's fine. I'm not against people moving around. But why would you open up? How many more like outdoor cafes do we need in San Francisco where they serve $12 drinks in the neighborhood where most people make under $12 an hour?
I notice that when I go to the Mission now. Mission, the historic Latino community for people outside the Bay.
Yeah.
Used to be able to get $3 burritos there. Now you got $12 wraps.
Right.
And people complaining when they go to the burrito shop, like, can you move back on the seasoning? And, you're like, what the heck?
Yeah.
So it's been a big change.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like disturbing, you feel me? Like, because I see all these new people in, and I'm like, man, what's happening to the people that's there before? And I know what's happening because all the people I grew up with don't live in the city anymore, and they can't afford to. You know what I mean?
What is why do you think the people who run San Francisco, which is considered a progressive, liberal-leaning city, why do you think they've allowed this to happen when you consider the historic roots in some of these communities?
I mean, at the same time we have those roots, San Francisco's always been an elitist community. It's always been an elitist city. Some of the richest people in California, live here, and in the Bay Area, you got neighborhoods like Pacific Heights and stuff like that. And this is the second most visited city in the world next to Paris as far as tourism. So to maintain the crispy clean Golden Gate, Rice-A-Roni cable car image, you got to sweep issues like homelessness and youth violence and housing. You got to sweep those issues under the rug because they want to maintain that nice pristine image so they attract the type of people with money. .coms, Twitter. They made more considerations for Twitter to keep Twitter in San Francisco, their offices, than any housing issue in the last couple of years.
They let them do a tax-free. They don't pay taxes here, and they haven't even hired locally with people. Twitter's located in what is known as the Tenderloin, right, which is where you will find San Francisco's homeless district. You're from San Francisco as well.
Absolutely.
Right, and so none of those people been hired yet.
Absolutely.
What are some of the other topics that you've hit on?
In the videos, I did one on education, which you pretty much covered right there. The budget cuts and the debt crisis around that is ridiculous. Food, just as far as like a lack of ability for healthy food for a fair price, and also a little bit of genetic modification and preservatives and stuff like that.
So you're not a fan of Monsanto?
No, definitely not. I try to, buy and eat organic as much as possible.
Right.
I kind of fell off with the videos because I've been so busy pushing my music. But I actually just wrapped one up on police brutality. So
right. Which is another dirty secret they keep out of San Francisco.
Of course.
Talk a little bit about what we find when we hear your music.
When you hear the music, it's just like, I'm not trying to be preachy. I'm not trying to be like the next Immortal Technique, like we got to overthrow the government and have a revolution and start shooting the president and stuff like that. It's just like the mind and the thought of a young man that's in the middle of this, like, and analyzing the situation. So I touched on everything from what it's like to be young, to be a teenager. I touched on the prison industrial complex. I touched on lack of housing. I touched on the school system. And it's kind of just like my experience in the struggle and just a call for people to become concerned. I feel like at the very minimum someone can do about this is to just care.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
How do you know, Dealer and Dregs, and then I'll come to you, Lady Blue. How are you connecting to an audience that is attracted to a Jersey Shore, a Real Housewives of Atlanta, you know, a Lil Wayne sipping on syrup, you know, a Nicki Minaj, maybe not so much now. She did that thing at the Grammys, but still, you know, how you know how do you stay competitive? In other words, in terms of reaching them, is it content? Is it beats? Is it something else? And I'll start with you and then come to you.
Well, it's definitely all of that. It's the content, it's the beats, but most of all, I'm in the hood. So I relate to people in the hood, and the things that I talk about, you know, are hood conscious. You know, it's talking about stuff that people can relate to on a day-to-day basis. Now, they might not want to outwardly be like, oh, I agree with that, but they be, you know, inboxing me like, Dealer, that song got me through. You know what I mean? Some of the hardest cats that you would think, you know,
right.
Let me know that I'm an inspiration to them, and that's why I keep going, because that's what this is about. I don't need the glitz and the glamour and the fame. I don't do this for that, because if I did it for that, then I definitely would have been on a long time ago. But it's just about, you know, really connecting to those people that are hurting, and it's a lot of people that want to hear this music. They just don't know how to go about, you know, really promoting it and pumping it up and saying we need this.
Right. That's real talk. Dregs, how are you connecting?
I mean, you know, the powers that be, they don't rest when they're forcing these negative images on us. So I don't rest either. I hustle. You know what I'm saying? Like, I push as hard as possible. I'm just one man. I got like a little publicist helping me out, but other than that, that's it. So I'm just like relentless. I be pounding the pavement. I do what I can online. And then, like she said, you know, just actually being in the places where this takes place. You know, I'm the type of cat, like, in my city, I could walk in any neighborhood and see someone I know.
Right.
You know what I mean? And people know me from the open mics and the rallies and the protests. And just like you said, I met you at a youth center. You know what I'm saying? So just being, like, a real person and not, like, some fake rapper that just, you know what I'm saying? Just
Is
not really
there a
involved.
void in leadership when you go to these places? In your neighborhood, are the so-called leaders there relating, or are they absent and you wind up being that person, Dregs?
Yes, no one wants to step up and be a leader. It's too easy to be a follower, you know, especially in my generation and the young generation, especially in this hip-hop community. Like, I'm to the point where I want to start calling out names of some of these artists that I know. Like, what is you doing? Like, you know, like, you claiming my city and you say you're putting on for my city, but where are you? You know what I'm saying? What are you really doing besides promoting negativity and promoting your own personal ego? You feel
Right.
me?
I hear that.
Exactly. And it's the same thing. I totally agree 100%. It's just a lot of, you know, personas and egos and
Right.
made up characters where people get on YouTube and be like, man, I'm out here, man. We doing this for the hood. But they not out here. Like you said, at the end of the day, we find ourselves looking around and having to be those people, because I feel obligated to do something for the young people. I feel
Right.
obligated. So when they don't step up, I'm going to step up.
Right. Lady Blue, how are you seeing it? You're in San Francisco, but you roll with Queen Dealer.
Right. I mean, I'm from San Francisco, and it's really interesting because I can't afford to live in San Francisco. So I've moved to the East Bay. You know, when I was 13, I was like, there's something about the culture of Oakland that really appealed to me as a young girl. And I've seen the gentrification happen, you know, and I mean, from New York to, you know, being in Florida and visiting and doing youth conferences, just how the gentrification is happening nationally. It's not just happening here in the Bay Area.
Right.
And
what do you think is behind it?
well, I mean, that's definitely a deeper discussion, you know, and
Well,
the
let's make it
powers
a
of
deeper
all
discussion.
evil, the powers of all evil,
Right.
you know, definitely have built this country on the backs of our people. You know, and I mean, as black and brown community, we can say that from the railroad, you know, from in the Bayview community, as far as just what's basically happening over in the shipyard. You know, all of our people was out there working and slaving and making and building these communities up. And now it's just like, oh no, we want to come and reclaim this prime property, you know. So it's a lot of different issues, you know, that I know play into this. And and it's unfortunate, but the stance that, you know, my sister and I have chosen to take is to educate our youth, you know, to bring their awareness up and let them know, you know, it's about the choices you make in this life that's really going to be a reflection of what your children will then come into living into experiences.
You know, I made reference to the competition of winning hearts and minds.
Absolutely.
Of people, a lot of things going on. The challenge that you face when you're trying to reach the folks, can you describe that, you know, and how you're able to overcome it?
Well, the lack of knowledge, you know, first and foremost, the lack of knowledge and the lack of family infrastructure in our communities, the absentee of parents, be it mother or father, you know, has definitely played into, you know, where the minds of our youth are today, you know. And I feel now coming into, you know, adulthood that, you know, it's my responsibility to give back in that fashion. So, you know, everybody's story may be different, but similar in some fashion. So, you know, some of the obstacles is just like people just choosing ignorance, you know, over being enlightened and being conscious.
But the conveyor of that ignorance oftentimes, or what's allowed the ignorance to be facilitated, has been our culture.
Right.
Has been culture, you know, has been the music, has been the TV shows, the reality stuff.
Absolutely.
So how are we able to deal with that? Do we hit the institutions? Do we hit the individuals? You know,
I feel like it's definitely a collective of all of it, you know, and utilizing these resources of digital media to really promote what it is that we stand behind, you know. So, you know, we have the Twitters, we have the Vimos and the Facebooks, and I mean, every time I look up, it's a new online networking social media outlet. Plugging into them, you know, plugging into them, you know, and just staying visible, you know. Queen Dila and myself, you know, we've been working together since 2007, and it's really been amazing as we bond in sisterhood and being an example to other young women and other young men. Like, it's okay to bond. It's okay. It's, you know, sometimes we get in this frame of thinking that I got to do it all by myself. And at the end of the day, none of us can do anything really by ourselves. Right. You know, we have to have that community that holds us up and uplifts us and encourages us, you know. So I'm really blessed, you know, for the opportunities that have presented themselves for me. And then, you know, giving, you know, credit to my family, you know, and them making sure that there was some foundation for me, you know.
Let me ask you this, you know, y'all being in Oakland now, but this is a Bay Area, and this is a nationwide problem.
Absolutely.
Bicycle pimps.
Come on.
Bicycle streetwalkers.
Come on.
A lot of that has been on the surface, especially in this area.
Yes.
Where there's been documentaries and it's been a centerpiece, you know, in discussion. It really came to the highlight recently with the Too Short video that was posted on XXL, where, you know, a lot of people are at him because he was giving fatherly advice to youngsters on how to turn a girl out, right? So, you know, so XXL and Short are, you know, on the gun, and that's probably a good thing for people who are upset about that. But with that being said, this goes beyond him. His advice is not the first time this advice has been given. As women, you know, just how are you able to reach and influence these young sisters when we know there's an epidemic now in human trafficking and, you know, and bicycle pimping, as they call it, going on right now? You know, 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds pimping for real.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, how did this happen in the land of the Black Panthers, the land of the free speech movement? How did this happen where you have activism, you know, that has been admired all around the world? How's this going on in our spot? And you front and center because this is in, you know, your turf.
Yeah, well, the breakdown was within the families. Once they broke down the family structure, you know what I mean, anything is liable to happen. Like they say, when you got that idle time, that allows the devil to get in. So that's what pretty much happened. These kids were raising themselves, and I'm a product of that, because when my parents, and it goes deep, but my father is known as a guru in in the town. Like, he had the only roller skating ring that was in the town, Mojo's and everything. So a lot of people history come up around the skating ring, right? But now he's on drugs heavy. So what happened with that, his last couple kids, which was my sister and I, we were the 10th and 11th child, we got into the system. My grandparents came and got us. My grandmother just had got out of a 2-month coma, you know, and so she's trying to, you know, heal and everything, and also raise us. So we're raising ourselves.
And this is not unusual.
Oh,
No.
I was going to hit
Not
upon
at
it
all.
because the crack epidemic.
Come on.
There was the documentary that came out, and they said there were 5 or 6 cities that crack just showed up and became dominant. New York, Miami, L.A., Philly, Washington, and Oakland. So, you know, we're in the middle of this whole thing. Famous drug lords have come out of this. But when you talk about raising yourself, this is not a unique situation.
It's
No,
definitely
not at all.
And I'm just blessed that, you know, when my grandmother recovered, you know, the structure again that my family has. Like, you know, we're a tight family. My family's from Arkansas, and we believe in helping one another. Like, my grandmother's house on in the middle of the block, and then we have 2 more houses on the same block. Then you go around the corner, my auntie's around the corner. So we're a real tight family.
So you were able to pull out.
So I was able to pull out by the faith in seeing the struggle of my grandmother. Like, I didn't want to put her through any more pain, you know, coming up as a youngster, because I went through a lot of stuff. Like, I got kicked out of school and labeled as a gang leader in '98 when I was in the 8th grade. And so, like, I could have took that turn, but when I got kicked out of school, I realized the heartache that I was causing on myself, and also the heartache that I was causing on my grandparents.
Right. Well, Blue, what do we say to these young ladies that are now oftentimes victims? I mean, well, they're victims, period, when you're 13 and being turned out. But what do we say to them? How do we reach them, you know, when young men are being given advice, you know, on how to turn them out, being taught?
I would definitely say, you know, it's, oh my God, my heart begins to beat really, you know, it's important that you love yourself first, you know, self-love, when I know a lot of times it's very struggling when everything around you may not seem to show you the love that you want to feel.
Right.
But it's definitely about searching within self and knowing. My grandmother would always say to me, God don't make no junk, you know.
Right.
So that being instilled into my spirit man first, I know that I have something to live for. You know, I have a purpose. You know, we're not, I mean, I hear young girls say, I want to have a baby because I don't know if I'm going to live, and I want to leave a piece of me here. So to hear that.
Hear women say that.
Hear
That used to be a
young
thing that men would say,
right,
like, I'm going out like a soldier, but now sisters
right
are
now
saying
young women are saying it, and it's like, how can you bring someone into the world when you haven't experienced life yourself in order to pass on that, you know, those morals and those values? But it's be encouraged, you know.
Right.
There's resources in the community that you can plug into, and there's a lot of free resources.
We're talking about 13-year-olds, though.
And you know, it's called choice, because I was 13 and I had to make a choice, and I could have either been a follower or I chose to be a leader.
Wow.
So you have to empower yourself first, you know, and it's not always the easiest thing to do, but find community services that are in your area, because I mean, as a host and a commentator, when I come into communities and do events and forums, there's endless vendors that are saying we have services available.
Right.
But our youth are choosing not to embrace these resources.
Can we expect them to choose?
Yeah.
Dealer,
And
you're
I want
saying
to say one thing on that. The only difference that I see that's different in like the Panthers' time and our time, there were people out there. You can physically make your choice. Like there would be like Christians out there, there would be Muslims out there, there would be like you were able to choose because you saw that visibly. And I think what's hard, the reason why they're making these choices is because visibly what they see is the pain. The people that are being uplifted are the ones that are inflicting the pain on them. And that's what's cool now. It's cool, like you said, to be a pimp either way it go, even for women and males.
Right. Let me just ask you this, and I don't mean to get too personal, but have you all ever been approached that way where you had to combat that?
Oh, of course. I mean, being a young woman and being, you know, it was a choice at a point in my life where I chose to leave home because I felt like me and moms can't get along, you know. I got to step out. And when you step out and you think you grown, oh, you're going to come into these situations where you are forced to make certain types of decisions for yourself. Right. And I had to, and being thick, and you know, our young women these days they don't look 13 no more. Right. You know, these young women is 13 and 14 looking like 17 and 18, like they coming out of high school. So it makes it hard for a man to look at a young girl and know like, oh, that's a baby. Right. And then especially with these young girls having the type of vernacular that they do, you know, with the influence of exploitation of women, you know, so women always being glorified. Oh, it's only, you know, it's good to basically take your clothes off and to be naked every time they turn on the TV. That's how a lot of times that's how we being viewed. Right. You know, so it's easy to fall into that. Right. In the same time, there are women that carry themselves with dignity and respect, you know, and I was able to see these women firsthand in my family. The family structure has been so diminished that it's very hard to see that, like that mirror image. Right.
Drake, let me ask you, you know, same topic, but looking at it from a male standpoint, because you work with a lot of, that's why I met you, you think, as a male. You know, especially in an industry where, come on, man, if you pimping and playing and hustling, you got a record deal and you're on the radio and you can do your thing. Right. But you're not doing that, and you're also working with a lot of young cats that might look and be like, well, this is where it's happening. How are you combating that, and how do you reach some of these young men, especially that you're engaging?
I mean, to me, the path to change is always education. Absolutely. So if you really break down to anyone, male or female, like what's the real results of what the path that you're going on, the real, you know what I'm saying, the consequences that can come from it. I mean, I got a song on my album where I talk about this, and there's a rapper, he said, I don't give a F about NoHo. And I said, there's 13-year-old girls out walking on that hoe stroll. So you really gonna say you don't give a F about a 13-year-old girl that is beaten and abused and selling her body? Like, you know what I'm saying? And like, that's fly to you to like to take her money?
Are you able to spit any of those lyrics?
I mean,
you could just say it slow. You know,
I don't have it memorized right now.
Okay,
Davey.
No doubt.
On the spot. Hold on.
Okay, I don't mean to put you on the spot. You
know. But I mean, just really, it's like I gotta condition myself not to think like this, like to buy into any of that. I mean, because it's like you talk about pimping. It could be bicycle pimping, or it could be Rihanna. You know, damn near wearing nothing on the cover of a magazine. Right. You know, and I'm like, it breaks my heart to like turn on a music video and just see like these like women like volunteering to be objects in the dude's video, and the dude literally talking about like, I don't give a F about her, I'll beat her up, you know what I'm saying, like in the music.
But how do we get the dudes to change? How do we as men, you know, impress upon them to be like, you know what, I don't even want you in my video at half naked. Put your clothes on, go home.
We need more music that empowers women. We need a perspective where it's like, it's not about how many women you sleep with, it's about how you treat them, and you know what I'm saying, the quality of relationships you build. And I mean, to keep it real, like the music that I'm hearing on KML coming out the Bay Area right now is glorified rape music. It's straight up like, you know what I'm saying, let's go F these bras and get them in the club and da-da-da-da-da. And I hear it in the club, and it's like when you drinking and you with all your boys and you're all horny and you're all gassed up and you're hearing that music, it's the type of music that's going to conduce a young man to go and grab a female and do, you know what I'm saying, and act out of pocket. So I just think...
So we're in the middle of rape culture.
Straight up. Yeah. Straight up. And I think as men, you know what I'm saying, more men need to step up and speak on it instead of buying into it.
Right. What would you like to see the men do from a female standpoint, Dealer?
Well, what we're doing now, we have a young women's sister circle that we started last year, and basically we have these young women coming together to speak on these issues so that we can bond together as women first before we then try to go out and bond with young men as well. And so what we are then trying to create is the young brothers create a circle where they're bonding and learning about some of these issues and learning about the history of this mentality. You know, this is the Willie Lynch mentality, you know, male against female, white against dark, you know, old against young, you know what I'm saying? And so it's just understanding that mentality of oppression starting with yourself first. Right. So if you can understand yourself first as a woman, then you can go embrace another young man. Then you won't allow a young man to treat you less than a young woman. Right. And so now we're challenging our brothers to now create a system where they're holding each other accountable, you know, and it's basically in the works. And for anybody out there watching and even everybody in here, like, we need as much support around that as we can get, especially for the young men, because we know that is definitely vital, you know, to our community, that we start having these conversations and that we start talking about this oppression, and we mend these relationships.
Wow, that's real talk right there. Yeah. You know, I want to thank you all for coming in.
Thank you for having us.
You know, like I said, we could talk about just the music itself because y'all have that, but I think I wanted to stress the point, as we stated earlier, that you know, y'all are artists that have moved your activism, you know, to the point where we might see you more as activists than artists, which I guess is needed now, and it's good that you can pick up those mics and do your thing. But it's in the tradition of so many who've come before you, the Harry Belafontes, the Paul Robesons, you know, the Public Enemies. You know, here in the Bay we have the Boots. From the Coup, the Dead Prezes, and others, and y'all are that next generation of folks that are going on.